After years of hyping up the release of the Epstein files, Republicans are now working overtime to sweep it under the rug. As we mentioned in the last block, late last night, House Republicans on the Rules Committee voted against legislation that would force the Department of Justice to release the Epstein files. And when that legislation was brought to the House floor for a vote today, Republicans voted overwhelmingly against it, a 211 to 210 vote. That is now 2 times in less than 24 hours. House Republicans have worked to hide the Epstein files, just like Donald Trump. Joining me now is House Democratic leader, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries of New York. What do you make of all this, Congressman? Like, why are we here, and what do you affirmatively want to see happen and the Democratic caucus want to see happen?
Well, it's great to be with you, Chris. At the end of the day, the American people deserve to know the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth as it relates to this whole Jeffrey Epstein matter. Donald Trump and his MAGA extremist allies have fanned the flames of this conspiracy theory for years. And so there's only 2 options at this point. Either Donald Trump, Pam Bondi, and that whole crew have been lying to the American people over the last several years about what is actually in the Jeffrey Epstein files, or alternatively, Donald Trump, Pam Bondi, and his allies in the Trump administration are hiding something from the American people right now. So we're determined to get to the bottom of this on behalf of the American people who deserve transparency from their government.
Reporter Annie Carney, who was just on in the last block, said that the line from Republicans on the House today were talking about appointing a special counsel. I wonder if that's something that you would support or other Democrats would support.
It seems to me that a special counsel is just a diversionary tactic. If the files exist, produce them, and produce them now to the American people. The Attorney General mentioned a few weeks ago that the files existed. In fact, she said it was on her desk. And so all she really needs to do at this point is to release it, as Donald Trump promised that he would do. This is also a situation where what we've seen from the Trump administration is a government of the billionaires, by the billionaires, and for the billionaires. We saw it during Trump's inauguration. This one big ugly bill was all about hurting everyday Americans to provide massive tax breaks to their billionaire donors. And now what we see is the possibility that there's a massive cover-up taking place within the Trump administration, because there may be people on the Epstein list within the Epstein files that Donald Trump is trying to protect, who happen to be part of his billionaire cabal.
Get this, Trump personally called Charlie Kirk, who co-founded and organized the entire conference, and then Kirk and others, I certainly softened their tone.
Plenty was said this last weekend at our event about Epstein. Honestly, I'm done talking about Epstein for the time being. I'm going to trust my friends in the administration. I'm going to trust my friends in the government to do what needs to be done, solve it, balls in their hands.
I'm going to talk about the Epstein files, and I'm going to make the case that even though there are unanswered questions about Epstein, it is in fact time to move on.
Now, as conservative influencers were eating their own about Epstein, the president was stealing the show on the 1-year anniversary of the day he almost lost his life. He made a triumphant appearance at a global sporting event.
I mean, what does the world come to when you cannot rely on the integrity of Charlie Kirk and Dinesh D'Souza? In fact, Fox, where Laura Ingraham was talking about that triumphant moment we're going to cover later, Fox is barely covering Epstein at all anymore. And when they do, it's to repeat Trump's spin.
He said that those files were made up by Comey and Obama, that Pam Bondi has been handling this very well, and whatever decision is made regarding the Epstein files is up to her. There was a real dust-up between Pam Bondi and Kash Patel and Dan Bongino. The president, Daddy, as Mark Rutte has dubbed him, stepped in and ended that feud the other day with a lengthy post on Truth Social.
Even FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino, who was apparently so upset, so worked up, so angry and distraught and ready to quit over the Epstein stuff, didn't come to work on Friday, is back at work like nothing happened. Again, there's basically 2 possible explanations, right? Why the right is falling in line, dropping the story. The first is there really isn't an Epstein file as the public understands it, some sort of like, black box with these names that's going to tell everyone who in the power elite were doing horrible things with underage girls. But the whole thing was ginned up as this absolutely deathlessly cynical exercise by a bunch of MAGA folks to throw red meat to the MAGA base and draw in the support from kind of anti-system voters, right? Skeptical of institutions, low trust voters who are very into Epstein conspiracies. That's one possibility. Deathlessly cynical. There's nothing really there. They kind of knew that. The other possibility is that Donald Trump is, at the very least, a little worried about his potential inclusion in whatever Epstein files there might be. As we have documented exhaustively on this show and repeatedly during the campaign before that, Donald Trump's links to Jeffrey Epstein go back years. There's the video of the two men dancing together and leering at women at Mar-a-Lago. There's the magazine profile from 20 years ago where Trump says Epstein likes his women young. There's one of Epstein's accusers, the late Virginia Jeffries, saying she was recruited while working at Mar-a-Lago as a teenager. Then, of course, the guy who gave Epstein his sweetheart plea deal back in 2008, Alex Acosta, was chosen by Trump to serve in his first administration, which later became a scandal. Of course, there is also Epstein talking about his friend Donald Trump. This audio comes from writer Michael Wolff, who spoke to Epstein back in 2017, 2 years before his death. These recordings were published by the Daily Beast late last year, shortly before the election, in fact. Now, we should note this audio has not been independently verified by ABC News. We don't know how it's been edited, the context particularly, but take a listen.
How do you know this?
That was close to straight. So he tells everybody what they want to hear, not everyone's charm. And I'm telling you that I know 4 or 5 people who have recently seen them.
Again, this is 2017, right? This is before the whole thing blew up again in Trump's face, and he was arrested again, and then he charged, and then he is said to have died by suicide in federal Department of Justice custody under William Barr and Donald Trump. In response to the Daily Beast, Trump's teams called those recordings a false smear as well as election interference and accused Wolff of, quote, lying for attention. But we do know from that now infamous Fox News interview that Trump, in his own words, has been concerned about releasing the Epstein files.
So if you were president, would you declassify, you can answer yes or no to these.
Yeah.
Would you declassify the 9/11 files?
Yeah.
Would you declassify JFK files?
Yeah.
Would you,
I did a lot of it.
Would you declassify the Epstein files?
Yeah, I would.
All right.
I guess I would. I think that less so because, you don't know. You don't want to affect people's lives if it's phony stuff in there because there's a lot of phony stuff with that whole world.
He is concerned about the reputations of people involved and possibly named in the files and wants to protect them. That's his own. He says it's phony. I don't know.
Can't hide. This is not going away. This story is going to keep on cooking. It's going to keep on simmering. Because it matters to the base, and it's what Trump sold himself on. And so even Trump officials in Congress are scared right now. And certainly, and this is important, because guys, you know this, and not to be too harsh on them, but they deserve it in a lot of cases. Democrats often have these political moments fall into their lap, and they refuse to play the card that they're given. They're given, pun intended, I guess, a Trump card, and they just refuse to play it for whatever reason. And finally, it looks like, and not just progressive Democrats, not just the boldest ones, but even some of the leadership are playing the card saying, we want transparency, we want openness, because they know, one, polling is very strong on this. Like 97% of Americans are unsatisfied with the info, or only 3% are satisfied with the info they've gotten from this. So everybody, Republican, Democrat, Independent, Socialist, the far right, everybody, every single person wants more. But in particular, this doesn't just unite Democrats, because it does. It cuts Trump off from his base and puts pressure on everybody in Congress. You gotta boo Trump, because even your constituents don't like it. And guys, this is where the rubber hits the road, And this could be the end of MAGA. Watch this. The last 30 seconds are stunning.
In fact, maybe there's some way out, but right now it seems like a lot of people are very desperate to both keep feeding that monster while not letting it devour them.
Yeah, and I mean, Sam, if only we'd seen inside a Trump conspiracy theory and knew what they would choose. Oh, yeah, Dominion. We know exactly what they choose. They follow their base. They follow their base to the brutal assault, physical, of law enforcement officers. They follow their base in terms of repeating things that Tucker Carlson described as demonic. Tucker Carlson described Donald Trump as demonic, but went ahead because he was so afraid of the Fox audience in that instance of that lawsuit. There's not an instance where the MAGA media figures have bucked the base, have bucked the viewer, have bucked the listener. And so I wonder what you're watching for in this.
Well, like Charlie Kirk, I had vowed never to talk about this again, but that vow was 2 hours ago, and we've already hit the statute of limitations of it, so I'm good to go. It's fine. There is a little bit of poetic justice, I suppose, to this, right? In that Trump, who has been the primary source of conspiracy theories in our nation's politics for over a decade now, is in a way being consumed by a conspiracy theory of its own. And obviously, you know, he does play some form of guilt here in spreading this, because it was him and his minions and his allies who have been stoking the Epstein story for years. I mean, there's plenty of tape of Dan Bongino, Kash Patel, even Pam Bondi saying, we know we have the files, they need to turn them over. And now, of course, in a position of power, they're not doing it. What I'm struck by, though, is just sort of how these conspiracies are incredibly impossible to dislodge. And I think that's what's happening here, which is that you can't convince people who believe in conspiracy theory that suddenly everything they've been told is wrong. And we know this because it's been tried before. And today in our Morning Shots newsletter, we revisited maybe the first real big conspiracy theory to consume a presidency, which was birtherism. In 2011, it was Donald Trump spreading birtherism. And Barack Obama's White House assumed at first that they could just push back with the truth. But it got to the point where it was overwhelming everything the White House did. And so what did they do? They put out Obama's birth certificate. And did that stop the conspiracies? No, it just expanded the conspiracy. So suddenly it was, it's not a long form birth certificate. You need to put out more. And Trump, who had been spreading it, was like, well, where are the college transcripts? And where's his passport information? And so you build off the conspiracies into more conspiracies.
Again, like, Trump did not expect this. Remember, like, he really felt this term was going to be very different. He thought, I've united the GOP. It's more united now in my camp than it was when I first became president. Because when I first became president, people weren't exactly sure. And over the years, I built a cult. The cult wasn't built yet in 2017. It was built over years, right? And I pushed out all the non-MAGAs, or most of them. And now all of a sudden, the Democrats, they're quiet. People weren't protesting him at the very start of his term. Took some time. And then what happened? Not only did he awaken all of you, and massive historic protests happened just a few weeks ago to stop his dumb birthday parade, but also MAGA is more loudly against Trump than MAGA has ever been. This could be the end of MAGA.